So great. We would have to traverse over the fake buildings. That meant that we'd first need to climb up onto the nearest one, and then we'd have to leap over the alleys between the rest, all while surrounded by near total darkness, since none of the lamps really lit up anything other than the main street. I looked around and spotted the shape of a dumpster by the pool hall on the right, but if getting out of here safely would really take so much effort, I at least wanted to get a closer look at the strange light, to maybe get some idea of how it was being produced or why it wasn't safe. Not wanting to waste time with any more arguing, I cautiously walked up to the edge of one of the bubbles, and Jack was close behind me, much to the disdain of Laszlo, of course. My repeated assurances that I wouldn't go into the sphere did nothing to assuage the guy. He was starting to sound damn well terrified about the idea of even getting close to the lamps. The glow had a bleaching effect on anything it touched, draining most of the color from the building walls and the yellowed, rotting 1980 newspapers and the vending machines, which must have been imported from America. Any object or structure past the glow also appeared desaturated, as the photons that bounced off their surfaces reached our eyes. This effect became more intense the closer we got to the lights. From a distance, the colors had barely changed. This technology was something else, otherworldly. "How do you think they work?" Jack asked me. "No idea," I muttered back and took a knee to get closer to look at something. "You see that?" I said, pointing to some damage in the sidewalk under the light and making sure my hand didn't go through the bubble. There were huge, lengthy claw marks in the concrete, like a really strong bear had tried to dig and tear its way into it. "Were those always there?" Jack wondered. It was a peculiar immediate response, but he did actually have a point. The three of us had swept over pretty much everything with our flashlights on our way in, and I couldn't remember seeing any claw marks. I figured we would have stopped to investigate if damage like that had stood out in an otherwise pristine place. "Boris?" Jack spoke up again a few seconds. "Your radiation thing." I hadn't even noticed. My dosimeter was clicking. It was slow and steady, so I wasn't too concerned about my exposure just yet. But it was the first time I'd picked up anything. Of course, I assumed it was just the light that I was so close to, putting out some weak alpha or beta rays. Then I realized something else. It had been difficult to see the monochrome light, but there was a thin layer of dust or dirt on top of the street and sidewalk, and for some reason, its coverage only extended as far as the glow did. Just outside the outer pink layer of the bubble, there was no dust at all. "I keep telling you, the lights are dangerous," Laszlo said angrily after coming up behind us. "You shouldn't even come this close to them. Now, let's go." It looked like us two Americans had satisfied enough of our curiosity for the moment, so we backed off and started on our own escape route. Not that I couldn't think about much of anything else other than what those lamps were made out of, and how they produced their light. I got one more look around me before we started on what must have been the craziest way out of the imitation town. But it wasn't that far, maybe 1,000 feet, across a strange space. I'd seen mall corridors longer than that. Laszlo didn't seem at all relieved when the two of us joined him at the dumpster. He must have still been too worried about getting out, despite his anxiety and me trying to not be a total asshole to our guide. I couldn't keep myself from opening the dumpster lid and giving it a peek inside, just in case there were any remaining halves of manuals or killer laser tag sets or haunted VCR game systems. "What are you doing now?" Laszlo asked, in a justifiably angry tone. "Stop messing around, we have a long way to go." I trailed off, since there was really no point in even bringing up my personal obsession with finding the next clue. I looked back at the town hall's second-story window and put out a suggestion. "Any chance we can climb up there and get into the control room?" "No, and the window's bulletproof. Can you start trusting me?" Well, not completely. Even so, I gave him a nod, and we began taking turns climbing onto the roof of the pool hall, which involved getting on top of the dumpster, reaching one of the second-floor windowsills, pulling ourselves up, and standing on the sill and doing the same thing to get onto the roof, all without falling off backwards and risking a broken bone. Laszlo went first and had no problems, as he was in good shape. Jack went next, and he managed to do it with some effort. I'm not in peak physical fitness, and I only just recently quit smoking. Sort of. Still had one a day sometimes. I did manage to get on the roof without embarrassing myself, though I had my concerns about jumping the first gap to the next building. Good. But we can't stop. The sooner we get out, the better. You make it sound like something's gonna come after us, Jack said, as a way to not so subtly ask if that was actually the case. He didn't even bother to respond. He got on top of the roof's parapet, checked to make sure he had a good balance, and without hesitating, picked up some speed and made the 5-foot-long jump onto the neighboring tavern. Made it look easy. Jack gave himself a bit of a personal pep talk, and after a deep breath, did his own running leap across the buildings. It was clumsy compared to Laszlo's stab at it, but if Jack could pull it off without losing his balance, falling into light below, cracking his skull, then I knew I had a chance. Once he landed and cleared the way, I went through with my attempt. As I ran across the parapet, I glanced over to my left to see that I was just inches from a spherical glow, while the top of the lamp itself was still some 10 feet higher than all of the rooftops. If only we could turn them off. I made my jump and planted my feet solidly onto the next building, with some room to spare. Like Jack, I needed a moment on top of the tavern to recover, and I took the chance to glance around again. From the roof, I could see more easily that the buildings had little depth to them, only going about half as far back as they would have if they were the real thing. It was like they were all bisected by the tall metal barrier which surrounded them, and as I looked behind me at the containment walls, I noticed a dark shape in the back corner of the tavern roof. Some sort of misshapen lump. I wandered over and used my phone's screen light to make it out. It was a lab coat. I couldn't find an ID card attached or in any of its pockets, but when I held it up, my heart just about started beating out of my chest. The back of the lab coat had been torn to shreds, and the damage to both the cloth was surrounded by dried blood. Even despite my rising concern, I remember thinking about being disappointed that it lacked any identification for whatever scientist or engineer it belonged to. Something like that really could have given us a solid lead on who these people or organizations were. With the discovery, I was ready to confront Laszlo about what might be lurking in the place. But he and Jack were already making the leaps to the pawn shop next door. I dropped the coat, got up on the next parapet, and made my second jump before they could begin yelling at me for falling behind. Good, Laszlo said after I got back to them. We just keep doing this until we get to the exit. I know this is insane, but it is the only safe way out. All right, enough, man. I spoke over him, trying to keep my temper under control. I just found a lab coat on the other roof that looked like the result of a starving grizzly bear attack. The damn thing must have had claws made of metal, because we both saw what it did to the pavement down there too. Laszlo stared at the two of us, but still looked like he had no intention of telling us anything. I took a step towards him and took on a pissed expression. Although I wasn't used to intimidating people, I could tell that I was making Jack worry, but he wasn't about to try and get answers, so I had to be the aggressive one here. By this point, I knew our lives were on the line. This is working for us, Laszlo told me after a few stressful seconds. When we're safe, I'll tell you everything. I promise. It didn't occur to me until I had a moment to think, but I realized that the dosimeter had let out a few clicks when I was holding up the lab coat. It must have also gotten a light dusting of radioactivity. Right about then, I went into a heightened state, like entering survival mode, and I can remember the two thoughts I had as the adrenaline started flowing. Where the hell were we? And what's trapped in here with us? But fine, we do it Laszlo's way and focus on getting out first. I went ahead and got ready for another jump with the others. The next building was a bookstore, and it was a bit higher than the first two, which would make it a harder job to get to. I could picture myself not quite making it and being forced to hang on to the side, where I'd flail about whilst trying to climb over. Wait, hold on. Jack suddenly whispered to us from the corner of the roof where he was looking down at the street, one hand raised in the air. Get down. Is someone coming in? Laszlo asked, then heard the same distant footsteps I did. Damn it, hide. Could be anyone. We did so, taking cover behind the parapet. We could be sharing the space with someone dangerous for all we knew. Security, police, armed drunks looking to cause some mayhem or loot the place. We had better odds just staying out of their way, and I still felt like we never really were alone in here. We waited until we saw two guys come in, not much older than me and Jack. They had ratty clothing, but must have spent any money they earned on their nice sneakers and the GoPros that were strapped to their shoulders. They looked like amateur urban explorers, and my guess was that they had never been here before. I was also fairly certain that they had a few drinks or got hopped up on something before coming out here late at night, based on the way they were stumbling about and laughing at each other's stupid jokes. When they got a little closer, I could make out they were speaking German. By chance, we weren't the only tourists here tonight, but unlike this pair, we had done the smart thing and hired a guide. Regardless of how they heard about the warehouse, if that's even what I could call it anymore, they might have now been a threat to our own lives, what with their bumbling around. Idiots. Laszlo growled as he watched them strut around the middle of the street and through the lights. They must have noticed the strange lamps as they pointed up at them and stared, but they were more interested in filming one another and laughing than taking a second to consider how abnormal all of this had to be. They're walking in the lights. What's going to happen? Jack said. Nothing good. Keep your heads down. Jack looked at the two hapless adventurers who had no idea where they were, then back at Laszlo and replied, We can't just sit here and watch. You want to get us killed? They're on their own. Jack glared at him for just a moment before standing up and waving with both of his arms to attract the attention of the tourists. Hey! Get out of the light! I watched as they came to a stop right in the middle of one of the glowing spheres. No doubt the worst place to be. They looked around in a stupor and quickly spotted Jack. Their reaction to finding another explorer among them was to point up, laugh, and tell another joke to each other. Stay away from the lights! Jack continued, but it was clearly futile. They shouted back up in German and fiddled with their cameras, maybe trying to get them to zoom in on the stupid American. Laszlo was staying low, like he still felt compelled to hide. That was another clue to me that there really was something else in here. Some sixth entity. Since Jack wasn't getting anywhere, I got to my feet, went to his side, and yelled down using what little German I knew. I was fairly certain that I had at least gotten my message across about the lights and to avoid them, and they should leave this place right away. It didn't come to any surprise that they didn't want to listen to me either. One of them even lit a cigarette as they got back to walking, filming, and mindlessly chattering. It looked like they'd gotten bored of our warnings, and they were ready to completely ignore us. Maybe if Laszlo had been open with us and just told us one single reason the lights were so dangerous, if there was something specific I could have shouted to them. Hell, they were never going to listen to us anyway, right? I gave up on shouting some sense into the two as they left the glow, seemingly without harm. They then passed by a second, and then a third pair of the lamps like it was nothing, and kept walking, making a few steps to the side to film the buildings. They were getting close to us, and I was beginning to expect that they walked right under us and by us, laughing all the way and making us feel like a bunch of lunatics. I turned to Laszlo and exclaimed, What the hell, man? They're fine. Nothing's happening. What are we even doing up here? Laszlo shook his head, opened his mouth to speak, but then instead walked over and joined us at the edge of the roof, although he kept his head down. The Germans were only a few streetlights away from the pair near us, and I figured we were about to end up in their coming YouTube video under the caption calling us the drunk explorers they ran into on the way. Maybe, I heard Laszlo murmur. Maybe it's not. Something moved in the corner of my eye, near the first set of lights, not far from the movie theater and entrance. A dark shape which moved so quickly that it was gone by the time I looked over. It had passed through the glow of the lamps, which rendered it colorless, if it had any colors to begin with. But I couldn't even be sure what I had seen at first, and didn't say anything. No, Laszlo said, and I noticed that he was staring in the same direction. It is. What are you talking about? Jack exclaimed. What's in here? The object or creature? hit my peripheral again, and I looked away from Laszlo, just barely missing my chance to see it running through the light a second time. But wait, if it was sprinting right down the street, then why couldn't I see it? Did it have some sort of optical camouflage that let it blend into the darkness between the lights? Was it even really there, physically? I only had a second or two to even think about it, before I saw it again in the light, this time getting a chance to burn its shape into my mind as it ran full stride like a predator going for the kill. I didn't get enough time to see it in good detail, but it actually did take the shape of a great cat, and was no smaller than a fully grown Siberian tiger. It must have been running at 50 miles an hour, at least, and as it got closer to us, I could feel its rhythmic, heavy impacts on the asphalt getting heavier. Equally strange, the sound and tremors of its feet also completely disappeared when it was in the space between the lights.
"Run!"
Jack shouted to the two down below, showing no concern for our own safety. Too late, Laszlo said to himself, just above a whisper. The tourists barely had a chance to turn around and look back at the beast bearing down on them. By the time they faced it, it had already covered the remaining distance between them. It was no wonder that Laszlo was so afraid what lurked in here. If it turned out he had actually seen it before, it would be impossible to outrun on foot. But the beast actually came to a sudden stop, just a few feet from the two explorers. It was in the light, and they were in the nearby darkness. Was it that it couldn't exist when it wasn't being bathed in the strange glow? It wasn't that it was just invisible without it. It was more like it was somewhere else entirely. It was the light itself that gave it form and made it real. The two froze in place and briefly studied the creature as a look of befuddled terror spread across their faces. It stared back at them, almost without a sound. Only some sort of metal creaking emitted from its body. Yes, metal. As it patiently stood still in a hunting position under one of the lights that also touched the edge of our building's roof, we all got a good look at the thing from above. It was not at all organic, and was designed to emulate an actual great predator in only the most basic of ways. Still, it really did have a cat-like posture, and looked closer to a tiger than anything else. A robotic war machine with sharp, serrated claws and jagged plates of solid steel armor, their edges jutting out in strange, oblong angles. I couldn't see its eyes from up above it, but I had seen enough to make it obvious to me that nothing like the mechanical monster should exist. No government had reason or means to build it, at least not yet. It was too advanced, too many moving parts. It was like it didn't even belong in this world, much less in an enclosed fake town in rural Ukraine. Could human hands actually manufacture such a thing?
"Stay out of the light!"
Jack shouted down to the two, as he did his best to keep his own eyes off of the beast. I think to keep himself from breaking down in fear.
Licht? Nein, Licht?
Unfortunately, despite Jack's efforts, his pleas were ignored. As sharp metal teeth bore down on them, our fellow explorers cried out and split up. They must have had different ideas in their mind for attempts at getting to safety. The taller of the two, in a brown jacket, took off in the opposite direction towards the town hall. His friend, who was carrying a backpack that must have held their gear, instead stayed in the darkness and ran to the side of our building, maybe looking for a place to hide. The mass of lethal metal turned its head towards the backpacker for a moment, but then decided to pursue the one straight ahead, running straight through the lights in a panic to get away. It crouched down, some hydraulics shifted, then a sound similar to an air brake went off. It leapt out of the glowing sphere and vanished into the darkness. Less than a full second later, we saw it running full stride through the next light, and then the next. Its target had no chance. As he was sprinting through the lights, only several lampposts away from the town hall, he looked back, just in time to see a mechanical nightmare lunging at him, emerging and taking the shape of nothing but thin, dark air. The beast opened its jaws, crunching down on the victim's shoulder, and carried him out of the light. Jack was frozen in place, and I was in shock, but I couldn't move my eyes away. and I fully expected to see the monster pass through the following lights with a flailing body in its mouth. But it didn't show up. Somewhere between the lamps, it had turned sharply or somehow simply chosen to go elsewhere and take its prey with it. God knows where he was taken. Poor bastard. His friend began to have a panic attack, but it looked like now he understood the danger of the lights. He scrambled into the darkness and safety of the nearby alleyway. With Jack still in a petrified state and Laszlo unwilling to do much of anything, I ran over to the side of the building and tried to help the survivor. There was a metal trash can he could get on top of, and if I could reach down with my arms, I thought I might be able to pull him up. I got his attention, leaned over the parapet, and dangled my arms down as he got onto the metal lid, his desperation causing him to nearly lose all his balance as he wobbled underneath. But our hands were a good 3 or 4 feet apart. I looked back and asked for help from the other two, but only Jack snapped out of it and responded. He came over and saw what I was trying to do, and quickly suggested that the guy remove his backpack and hold it over his head. If I could grab onto his straps, I might be able to pull him up, while Jack held on to me to keep me from going over. He managed to pass on the message to the person we're trying to save with just another 2 basic German words, and it was starting to look like we'd actually have a chance to pull him up once he took off his pack, held it above his head, and began jumping, all whilst keeping the trash can from falling over, an impressive feat considering that he'd come in inebriated. On his 4th jump, I managed to grab onto the strap and got him into the air, although it was only the adrenaline and Jack holding me back that gave me the strength to begin pulling him up. Slowly, the guy and his backpack got closer to the roof. I really thought it was going to work. Until that metal creature emerged from the shadows again, stepping into the nearest light like a cat on the prowl. As much as it frightened me, I figured it wouldn't be able to do anything as long as we stayed in the darkness. The problem was that thing possessed some sort of intelligence, and was especially aggressive or territorial. It turned its gaze towards us, took a few steps to think of its next move, and proceeded to ram its entire body into the lamppost. The impact was strong enough to rip its 2 industrial rivets off the ground, and the pole began to lean, but its light didn't even flicker. It was quickly obvious what it was trying to do, and upon realizing it himself, the tourist we were trying hard to rescue began to panic even more. I tried to pull him up all the way, I really did. But damn it, I just didn't have enough time. That machine bashed into the pole a second time and it toppled over, bringing its glow with it and filling the alleyway with light. It crashed into the side of the next building and was so heavy that it took out much of its wall, which was little more than plywood. As the roof partially collapsed as well, the explorer lost his balance, letting go of the backpack and fell onto the ground. He didn't even have a chance to recover before the machine leapt onto a pile of broken wood, then lunged at him and dragged him away by his legs. He kicked, cried out, and tried to free himself, but there was nothing he could do against the tons of force crushing his shins. In a matter of seconds, he had been dragged away into the darkness, leaving only his backpack behind. Before I could fully process what had just happened, I got yanked backwards by Laszlo, who had also grabbed Jack in the same motion. He pulled us out of the light that was now spreading across the half of the rooftop. I hadn't even realized at that time it had been bathing me. It caused a tingling sensation on my skin and was making my dosimeter go off, but otherwise didn't feel too strange. The 3 of us had the expected argument. I tossed around the word coward a few times in Laszlo's direction. He told us that we tried our best, but the 2 were probably dead the moment they came inside with the lights on, and we had to focus on our own survival. After we had a few minutes to cool off and try to get past what we had just witnessed, we got back to working on an escape plan. As fast as that thing was, we figured that we'd at least be able to jump onto the next part of the roof that wasn't damaged, and not get grabbed in midair. There was no telling what was lurking in the shadows, but as long as we were running and jumping at full speed, high above the ground, we should be safe. We were making Laszlo go first again. The 2 of us didn't say it, but it was the least we could do after not even trying to save someone else's life. We moved to the back of the building right up against the cement wall and at the end of the alley. giving us some needed distance from where the mechanical beast might be lurking. We knew that if it was actually waiting on the roof of the building we were jumping onto, at least one of us would probably be screwed. Laz ran and leapt across over the alley, passing through the toppled light's glow for a few dangerous feet. He landed on the bookstore's rear corner and on the other side safely. Jack hesitated more than he had the previous 2 jumps and looked around for any signs of the monster, before also making over the hop. Thinking we were okay, I didn't expect that my own jump would go badly. I ran across the back parapet, flush against the containment wall, and only saw the danger a split second before I took into the air, when it was already too late to stop or change course. The beast was charging down the alley and jumped when I did. I could see its jaws and its bright red eyes glaring at me like a sinister pair of car tail lights. I felt a surge of fear and icy adrenaline mid-air, and it was like time froze for a moment as I stared at the thing. Its calculations seemed dead on, and it looked like it would slam right into me, then drag me off to the other place between its teeth or claws. But Jack was there for me at the edge of the broken roof of the bookstore. He had outstretched his arms, and I noticed at the last possible moment of my jump I managed to grab onto them. Risking his own life, he yanked and pulled me forward, upping my momentum just enough. The jaws of the beast brushed at my back, and in the following seconds it rammed its head into the containment wall, dropping to the ground like a ton of bricks, and then began thrashing around in the narrow alley in its efforts to right itself. We didn't fare much better. Maybe it was the combined weight of all 3 of us, or my horrid, messy landing, or both, but the flimsy bookstore roof really couldn't take any more punishment, and about half of what remained of it collapsed under our feet. Surrounded by debris, which included styrofoam of all material, I think it was padding between 2 thin sheets of plywood that made up the roof, we fell on our asses down onto the 2nd floor. We didn't even really get a chance to see it since the also damaged floor was broken below us. We hit the lowest level and I landed right on top of the remnants of the collapsed wall. The drop was painful enough, but to make it even worse, it felt like a big splinter had just punctured my leg, and it pretty much immobilized me. Just a few feet away was the machine, still trying to get off its back, and it tossed about, its claws flailing wildly and looking like they could cut my head right off if they made impact. The toppled light's glow filled up half the fake bookstore, and I had maybe only seconds to get out of it and to safety. I couldn't count on Laszlo again, though. He had already saved himself by crawling away, out of the light and into the dark on the other side of the room. Jack, though, was still on his A-game, and having emerged mostly unscathed from the pile of not-so-deadly broken foam, he got over to me and helped me get my leg up. It hurt worse than I expected, because as it turned out I had been impaled by a long, ugly nail sticking out from a wooden beam. At least I got a shot for that recently, I remember vapidly thinking. Endured the pain until I was freed, which at that point I noticed the light actually pierced straight through the walls. Even if most of the bookstore's siding hadn't fallen apart, we'd still be in danger from the street lamp now resting on its side in the alleyway. Another street light in front of the store had its glow passing right through the windows, wall, and door, meaning our only safe spot was the back corner of the place, maybe 10 square feet of shadow. The beast flipped over from its back, just as Jack pulled me away and out of the light. I then caught my breath whilst we slumped against the intact wall opposite the alleyway. With its servos and hydraulics groaning and the sounds of deep industrial menace, the thing slunk over until it was just feet away, unable to walk into the shadow beyond the glow. I got the best look at it yet, with its bright red eyelights nearly blinding me. I noticed the nicks and small dents in the multi-layered face, possibly the ineffectual scars left over from its victims, who managed to get a knife strike or gunshot in before being dragged away. My dosimeter, pointing right at the creature, was also going crazy, which Jack also noticed. "Must be radioactive," he remarked between deep breaths. "Think it's nuclear powered?" "Whatever it is, it was designed to kill."